Time management for efficient foreign language learning is the subject of this lecture, but I think that a fair amount of what I have to say is of much more general applicability. So if you are interested in time management, then I invite you to stay around for at least the first portion of this lecture, even if you're not particularly interested in studying a foreign language. Let's begin by looking at some procedures for finding or making time to study. If you're interested in managing your time, the first thing you need to do is to get a truly accurate idea of exactly what you do with it, how you use it at present. So in order to calculate your daily use of time in detail, you need to get some sort of basic digital wristwatch with a stopwatch function on it and spend a couple of days, because you might have a different schedule for each day, you might not have a typical day, and we want to be accurate. Spend a couple of days really documenting, chronicling exactly what you do all day, every day. And when you do this, you will probably be in for somewhat of a surprise or even a shock. I think we all know that we tend to spend a lot of time doing things, surfing the internet or social networking or watching television, but when we read statistics that are frightening to me, saying that people spend hours and hours a day doing this, I think we tend to not know that it might apply to us. And when you realize that it does, when you say, hey, I spend so many hours a day doing these things that I have to concur, not necessarily productive, and I want to do something productive, like study a language, then it's easier to put some discipline on yourself and sacrifice some of this time in order to make time to do that. Likewise, you might find that you're not doing these non-productive things, but maybe you're a true workaholic, and when you see for a fact that you spend 14 hours a day working hard, and you think, well, I want to do something else, I want to add something to my life that will benefit me in another way, you might be able to say, well, I can take an hour from that and give it to something else, such as language studies. So get a detailed analysis of exactly how you use your time, and then you need to sit down, the second point here, and critically evaluate and prioritize what you want to do. And having done that, having looked at how much time you might be able to free up, and again, presuming you're interested in studying a language, you need to think about, well, how many hours a day can I give to this activity? And note that I said hours. It is possible to learn a language over time by studying for just minutes a day. I think that if you study for, say, 15 minutes a day, each and every single day, systematically using a good method, over years your knowledge will build up. But I don't think that this is appropriate for most people. It might be all right for those who are very disciplined and who are just interested in adding something else to their life, for self-improvement, gaining knowledge, curiosity, or for polyglots, people who are studying many languages at a time and are interested in the learning process and increasing their knowledge rather than developing specific skills by a specific date. But I think that is what most people want to do when they get the idea of studying a language. You want to develop real abilities within the foreseeable event horizon as soon as possible, basically. And if you want to do that, then yes, just a few minutes a day, half an hour a day even, it's not really enough. We need to think in terms of hours a day in order to get there. Learning a language takes a lot of time, a lot of investment of time, and you need to give it. I think the reason for this primarily is that as I mentioned in the preceding video on habit formation, studying is it's a self-propelling cycle. When you get into the habit of doing something regularly, you will make progress. And the fact that you're making progress is motivating to get you to continue studying, continue doing that. So in order to get up the right degree of momentum for learning a language, you need to make enough progress at a steady rate. And I think that we do need to think in terms of hours a day in order to do that. So at least an hour, preferably a bit more, in order to really learn a language. So let's say we're working with an hour right now. You can free up an hour. You're going to take an hour a day to study your language. You don't want to do it all at one time. The next thing to do, point number 4, is to calculate the length of time that you can remain focused on study. And this will probably be in the 15 to 30 minute range, and perhaps even less. I first learned this when I was in graduate school about 15 years ago, and when I first heard it, I didn't think it was true. I thought that I could stay focused on my studies for much longer than that, and breaking them up seemed counterintuitive and not productive. But when I tried it, I found that it was true. If you sit down and study and try to remain completely focused on something, after a certain point, your mind will start to wander. And although you can force it back onto the task at hand, that takes energy itself. Or you can continue doing the task at hand with your mind somewhat wandering, which is not particularly efficient. So it's much better when you're studying for maximum efficiency to stay completely 100% focused on the task at hand, which means you need to do it in these shorter intervals. And again, these were statistics or figures from a generation ago, and since that time, even older people like me have become habituated to multitasking, distracting machines, and another generation has grown up with it. So it's probably going to be on the shorter end of this, or even less, perhaps. But if you don't know, if you haven't started studying yet, you might as well start with just 15 minutes. But if you're already in the habit of studying, if you can figure this out, this would be a good thing to do. Because the next task, point number 5, is to divide the hours a day that you're going to study a language into time slots of this length that you can remain focused, or just under it. Again, we don't want to spend our energy forcing ourselves into focus. We want to stay focused. And so let's say you find that you can study and stay focused for 20 minutes. It's better to study, say, for 15, so that you don't have to use your energy forcing yourself back to it before you lose interest. It's best to break off. So once you know that, say you're studying an hour a day for 15 minutes a day, that's 4 times a day you want to study, and you want to schedule these slots realistically throughout your days at times when you think that you can keep them. It's nice if you have perfect balance, but to be realistic, if you can't, they don't need to be totally spaced out at 6-hour intervals, but it's best if you would have 1 in the morning, 1 at noon, 1 in the afternoon, and 1 in the evening. Why is that? First and foremost, what I was just talking about, the focus issue. Doing this, you will stay completely focused each time that you study. That's the most efficient way to study. Second of all, by spacing your intervals out like this, you're basically doing spaced interval repetition. You're keeping the material active in your short and mid-term memory, which makes it go into your long-term memory all the sooner. By studying every 6 hours rather than just once every 4 hours, you're keeping the material much more alive in your head. And also, third point, when you do this, I think that you give an important psychological message to yourself that studying is not simply a task that you do, it's a long-term project, it's part of you, it's something that you do, it becomes a lifestyle, it becomes part of you, and that's important for maintaining it and making progress in it. And the fourth point, the fourth reason to divide your time into slots rather than studying at one time, is that it gives you a great deal more flexibility and security in your study habits. If you only are able to study at 1 hour, you just have to make the best you can with it. But if something comes up during that hour and you miss it, if you haven't formed the habit of studying, that can be very detrimental. It's very much harder to do it again the next day. It can bring the whole project to a crashing halt. Whereas if you have 15-minute time slots peppered throughout your day, if you have to miss one of those but you still make the others, then you're just fine. It's not an issue. It's much easier to keep going in this fashion. So these are at least 4 specific reasons for scheduling your time slots throughout your day. And once you've done that, you've got a schedule, you need to use the habit formation techniques I talked about last time to get into keeping these time slots. And the 8th point is that in these time slots, there's no need to do the same thing each time. There are literally scores of different techniques that we can use when studying languages, and they can reinforce each other and add variety and interest. So it's important to put some diversified techniques in the different time slots and try to keep those for each one. But also, keeping the 9th point in mind, trying to keep your options for what I call here temporal reclamation or salvation compilation, or basically this means that in many people's lives there's a fair amount of what we can call unpredictable dead time in the day when you have to wait online or in line or on the telephone or on doing something, and you don't know how long you're going to be sitting there. If you can keep certain types of study material with you, that it's possible to do just a little bit and gain something. Learning vocabulary with flashcards or doing pattern drill exercises. If you keep this kind of material at hand, you can reclaim these lost minutes. Another thing to keep in mind in this respect is if you know that in some of your time slots you can only do one thing, say you have a long commute on the bus each day and you often have to stand and can't do anything else, it's hard to read a book or do something else. You can always listen, so you don't want to schedule your listening material for another time, but save it for this kind of time. So these are a number of procedures for finding or making time to study using your sort of current lifestyle, your current habits. But if you're really serious about managing your time, then you might also want to look into not just rescheduling, but making some actual lifestyle changes that can make you more efficient and more effective in your study habits. So there are a number of aspects of life that we want to look at in this regard, and the first and far and away the most important is sleep. Look at your sleep habits. It's very important to get enough sleep in order to have your mind function and be able to remain focused, and yet when it comes to studying, I think one of the most common, understandable, but normal, but still incorrect strategies is to try to cheat yourself on your sleep, to not get enough sleep, and that just doesn't work. It might work when cramming for a test the next day, but over time, no, you need to get enough sleep. But how much is enough? Nobody knows. We always hear about your 8 hours, but some say it's 9, some say it's 7. I personally find that I need only 6 hours of sleep, but I also have found that it's not just any 6 hours of sleep, it's a specific range of 6 hours of sleep. That is to say, I have a biorhythm of sleeping, and I believe that everybody has this. And yet society, adult life, tends to force us all into a rhythm that might not be our own. We tend to, as adults, be induced to go to sleep fairly late at night, approaching midnight, and to wake up 6ish, 7ish, and perhaps that is your rhythm, but just because that's what society puts on you, perhaps it is not. Perhaps you don't need to sleep at one long stretch. You would be better off breaking your sleep into shorter bursts. And perhaps, like me, you might have a different rhythm. My rhythm, it's hard to keep social life, but I manage somehow, is to go to sleep very early in the evening and to wake up in the wee hours of the morning. And when I do this, I find, as I said, that I'm perfectly alert and awake and able to stay focused all day long on 6 hours of sleep. But if I try to get those 6 hours of sleep at going to bed at midnight and waking up at 6, it just doesn't work. I need to go to sleep when I first get the urge to sleep, and then I just wake up by myself. And I think that is very important when it comes to sleeping. Although I encourage you to study with a stopwatch, I encourage you to sleep without an alarm clock. I think that if you need to be jerked out of your sleep, you're cheating yourself. You're really doing something wrong if you break the process that is supposed to rejuvenate you and revive you. You need to just wake up on your own. So in order to find your sleep habits, it's not necessarily easy. You might need to take a vacation by yourself in which you just first catch up on any sleep deprivation you have and just try to find your rhythm and keep it. But if you're able to do that, I think that you can quite possibly add some hours to your day and add focus quality to your day as well. So definitely, if you're interested in time management, make sure that your sleep is well regulated. The second lifestyle change that you may want to consider making when it comes to studying effectively, is to look at your multitasking habits. We live in an age that encourages multitasking. at the time when I happened to be making this video, the MRT, the Metropolitan Rapid Transit System here in Singapore, where I unfortunately find myself living at present, is flooded with a commercial a marketing campaign for some new multitasking tool that promises to run the maximum number of applications at the same time so you can get maximum productivity. I recognize that this is the spirit of the age, but with all due respect, I totally disagree, especially when it comes to studying. Multitasking is not good. It does not make you more productive. It makes you less productive. It breaks your focus. It breaks your concentration. When you try to do two things at one time when you're studying, I don't think you are able to give 50% of your energy to each one. I think by virtue of dividing your energy, your maximum, giving it a quarter of your energy each, you're losing 50% of your abilities. And believe me, I understand the temptation. It's very easy for me. You've got your computer on your desk and you're trying to study and you think, oh, I can check something here or download something at the same time. It's easy to get sucked away, so I think it's best to not have your computer at your desk or to study away from it or turn it off unless you're actually doing something on it. And likewise, when it comes to studying, because I want to learn lots of languages and I've got a schedule and I am busy, I certainly understand the temptation to try to multitask and to do various things at one time. And you think to yourself, well, I'm writing out my Chinese characters, surely I can also listen to a story at the same time. Again, that is just not efficient, not effective to do that. If it really comes to it, I think that there are a few things that it is possible to multitask with in language learning, but you have to be quite advanced in several languages in order to do them. One of them, I don't think it really qualifies as multitasking, is simply to use a language that you've already learned well in order to learn another language. That is, use textbooks in that language, use materials in another language in order to learn a third language, and that way you are in a sense using both, but you're not multitasking when you're doing that. Way that you're multitasking, the only thing that I've ever found that you're able to truly effectively and efficiently multitask in is to read a book in one language while you simultaneously listen to it, a recorded book, in another language. But again, you need to be quite advanced in both languages in order to do this. But apart from that, it's just not possible to multitask and be focused. So by cutting down on your multitasking, you will increase your efficacy in studying a language. The third area to consider in terms of making a lifestyle change for effective study is the area of exercise. And here too, I don't think I have anything new or revolutionary to say. I think it's well known that although if you're not in the habit of exercising, when you first start to do it, it makes you tired, it's fatiguing, it makes you sore. But once you get into the habit of exercising, it rejuvenates you, it gives you energy, it gives you strength, it gives you endurance. And so I think that if you're interested in studying a language, you've probably got a sedentary lifestyle like me. I think it's important to get as much exercise as you possibly can. And in this regard, perhaps contradicting myself seemingly about what I just said, it is possible to multitask. Well, I just said it's not possible to multitask in terms of doing two mental activities and do them well efficiently, such as studying in two different things at the same time. It's perfectly possible to combine physical activity and mental activity. And so I think in at least this one regard, I'm very, very happy that I live in this age and not in an earlier one, is that we have all sorts of abilities to listen to recorded materials, either study materials at the beginning of our learning, or more advanced studies, actual native materials, recorded books in a language. You can go for a long run and listen to a novel at the same time. And in this fashion, you can get hours a day of endurance exercise, running or working out with weights or something, and at the same time be listening to language learning material. So this is a way that you can do two things at one time and profit from both of them. So the exercise in itself is is good for your mind, your body, your ability to focus, and at the same time you're able to study to a very real sense at the same time that you do it. So get as much exercise as you possibly can, and you will be a more effective studier. The final area to look at is the whole range of diet, what you eat. We are what we eat, and just as I don't believe that everybody has the same biorhythm for sleeping, I don't believe that everybody has the same metabolism. So while I have my ideas of what a good, appropriate diet is, I don't want to talk about them because they might not be applicable to everybody, but here I would just invite you to, again, think about some of the facts that I've been talking about. We are creatures of habit, and we tend to fall into habits that might just be sort of imposed upon us. The way we eat and what we eat tends to come from our society, and if we examine that and look at it and say, are there more healthy things to eat? Are there other rhythms and timings of eating? If you are in the habit of only having a few big meals, after that you sit around and digest and you affect your blood sugar, and all these things can happen, whereas if you eat many smaller meals throughout the day, perhaps you might have more equilibrium and be able to stay focused a bit more when you sit down to study. Likewise, looking at what you eat and how you eat it, looking at the number of stimulants, other things like that, all of these things can affect you. So if you're serious about wanting to manage your time better, you also will want to examine the whole issue of what you eat and how you eat it. So these are some lifestyle changes. We've looked at ways of scheduling studying into your time, into your day, and some changes that you can make to do it. Let's look now at the issue of time management for intensive language study. Until now we've been talking about just factoring in some time for studying a language. What if you want to do more? What does intensive language study mean? I don't know that there's any specific definition of it. It means more than the average, basically. But it means, it can also mean that it makes it the true focus of your life. It's all that you do. So I think that there probably is general consensus that when you're really, really serious about learning a language, the best way to do it is to be totally immersed in it, to go to the country where it's spoken and to cut yourself off from your own language and to only be in that new language that you're trying to learn all day, every day, surrounded by it. But what's the best timing for doing that? Is it good to do it from the word go, to start learning the language under those circumstances? Perhaps you have to if you're in sort of anthropological, linguistic learning circumstances. If there's no study materials available for a language, then you have no choice but to do this. But what if there are? What if there's plenty of study materials? What if you want to learn a language like Spanish? Is it best to just plunge yourself into, go to Mexico and live in a small village all by yourself? Or is it better to develop some abilities before you go? I think unquestionably it's the second case. If you try to go too early before you are able to think in the language, you're not going to be it's not an effective use of your time. You need to build up from scratch. You'll get into the habit of not thinking in the language. You'll probably be frustrated and isolated as well. Whereas if you spend the time beforehand to develop at least some abilities, some general intermediate level of abilities, as soon as you get there, you'll be able to take full advantage of the immersion situation. So it's not effective to go too early to learn right away, but it's much more effective to build up some abilities before you go and immerse yourself. So if you're interested in intensive language study, before you do that, how many hours a day is it possible to do intensive language study? Well, if we look at, I read a line that I remember about the United States Foreign Service Institute, where diplomats are trained years back, that talked about the theoretical maximum number of hours a day being six hours a day, which is what they give, and which is also what's given as a maximum at many other intensive institutes that I've experienced when I've gone to do homestay immersions in a number of countries. They have generally offered 4 hours a day, but also have a 6-hour option, and that's what I've taken. And when I've asked if I could do more, they said they didn't have that, you couldn't do that. And right now, I happen to be working at an intensive institute, the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization's Regional Language Center here in Singapore is a place where people come for customized special language courses and methodological courses, which is what I myself teach, for a week at a time, up to 6 months at a time. And here they're given the maximum is 6 hours a day, 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon. So 6 hours a day of sort of instruction, and that's often supplemented by several hours a day, 2-3 hours a day of homework, of self-study. Seems to be the maximum that's given at intensive immersion institutes. And I can attest that I myself, when I was doing those home stays, immersions, I kind of regretted taking the 6-hour option. It's quite exhausting to sit one-on-one talking to another person all day long. And likewise here, I can see my students at the end of the day, they're flagging, they're worn out. And I, on the other end, on the teaching end, thankfully, most often I just have to teach 3 hours, just a couple of times a week. But every so often, because of scheduling, I have to cover for a colleague, or there are a number of programs back to back. And there have been times when I've had to teach for 6 hours a day, and that's truly, truly exhausting. I think if you haven't been under those circumstances, but you've gone to any kind of conference where you try to attend all of the sessions, yes, it really takes something out of you to be interacting and focused on that interaction for that amount of hours per day. So let's keep that in mind and move on to the issue of how many days per week you can study. And again, taking all of these intensive training or studying institutes as an example, how do they do it? They give you, they basically adhere to the work week schedule, basically 5 days a week, and then the weekends off. Maybe they make you study on Saturday mornings as well, but you'll at least get Sunday and Saturday afternoon off. So that's the way it's done. Why is it done that way? Again, I think more than anything else, out of social convention, to give, for labor laws, to give people time to spend with their families, and I like weekends and holidays as much as anybody else. I don't want to say anything against them, and they're a wonderful institution. And I think the idea that's often given behind them is you need that time to rejuvenate and get rest and repose after working hard all week. And I think that's unquestionably necessary in these kinds of institutes where basically you are depleted, you're exhausted at the end of the week from studying in the way that they have you study. But just simply and purely objectively speaking, is it a good language learning strategy to exhaust yourself, to deplete yourself for 5 days in a row, and then to take 2 days or a day and a half completely off? How are you taking that day off? If you're truly immersed when you're relatively advanced, if that means that instead of actually studying with your teacher in the classroom, you're out there totally immersed living the language, that might not be so bad. But if it means that you just don't do anything, you study hard for 5 days, and then 2 days you don't study at all, is this a good strategy for learning a language? No, absolutely not. It means 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's not a good way of studying. It's much better to be consistent, to do it every single day. And that means that I think we need to look at the whole issue of degrees of intensity. As I just said, I myself, in the conditions of intensive institutes, as I've experienced them and read about them, I completely understand the basic 6-hour-a-day rule. But I also know, and if you're interested, you can go read my biography on my webpage, that there was a time in my life, about 10, 12 years ago, when I lived under very special circumstances that enabled me to study really pretty much all day, every day. And at that time, I was able to study for much more than 6 hours a day. I was able to study for double that, 12 or even more, 14, 16 hours a day, was only after about that amount of time, about 14 hours, that I began to experience the symptoms of my eyes not being able to focus and feeling tired and red, and of my brain feeling sort of full, like it couldn't hold anymore. But I was able to do it for 12 or 14 hours, not just 6. Why was that? I was studying with a different sort of rate or pace of studying. I think that that's very important to keep in mind. To make an analogy from the world of athletics, I can go out and run for 4 hours, and if I get lost in the woods and I need to take 5 or 6 hours to get back, I'm certainly fatigued by the time that I do so, but I never come to a point when I feel like I just can't take another step. Whereas I can also go out and try to run up a flight of stairs as fast as I can, and after just 15 or 20 minutes I'll be thoroughly drenched in sweat and exhausted, and have that feeling that I can't go another step. So it's a question of pacing. Do you run any kind of machine at full capacity until it overheats and needs to shut down, or do you get to a sort of cruise speed so that it can keep going? I think that these intensive institutes tend to push you at too fast a pace when you're not in condition for it. Again, you build up the conditioning, you build up the ability to go for longer, but yes, it's better to get into condition and then go at a cruise speed than to jump in and go at full intensity. Also, these institutes that I've experienced, that I've seen, that I'm engaged in right now, do not provide anything like the variety of activities that are available to study. Again, there are dozens or scores of different techniques that one can use for studying, and in the scheduling of these kinds of institutes, you don't have your time divided up as I talked about above. It's not in 15-minute slots or 20-minute slots. It's usually an hour and a half at a time of doing one thing. So for all of these reasons, I think that there is a much better model for an intensive language study institute, and that is to basically reverse the pattern above of saying, instead of having 6 hours a day interaction and learning and maybe 2 or 3 hours a day of self-study, it would be to have more like 6 plus hours a day of self-directed study with 2 or 3 hours a day of interaction, conversational interaction. So this could be provided, self-directed intensity, with guidance in an institute like this. You could go to it and you could be given a personalized schedule with, if you had all the support that you needed, if you had the environment of this activity going on all around you, if you had a wide variety of materials to study from and people to guide you in studying it, and then were called out of your self-directed activity to get the conversational practice and interaction that you needed, I think that it would be possible for people to study for far more than, again, the sort of 6 hours a day that are given in most institutes that I know of. I think that the reason for this, again, is that, yes, studying in a self-directed fashion with a wide variety of materials and activities, that can be rejuvenating, interesting, energizing, whereas studying fully focused beyond your time limit and interacting with others the whole time, that can be depleting. So these are some thoughts about intensive language study. And now let's move on to a final topic of interest for language study. That is time management for polyglottery, time management for studying more than one language. I think that most people are able, when they think about studying a language, if they want to learn 2 languages at the same time, if they're aware of this, they have a conundrum. What should I do? Should I study them at the same time, or should I study one and then the other? I think that common sense, the most common advice that people get, is that it's much better to study in sequence. Learn one and then learn the other one. Put all your energies into learning one, and when you've learned it, then you can put all your energies into learning the other one. Against that is the idea of simultaneous study, doing them both at the same time. And the reasons people say you shouldn't do simultaneous study are, first and foremost, that it will affect your rate of progress, and secondly, that you might get confused between the languages. There's some validity to this. Again, if you only have a small amount of time, say an hour or two a day, it's unquestionable that if you gave it all to one language, you would make faster progress in it than if you divided that between two languages. But if you are able to give a lot of time, if you're a full-time student and able to give a lot of time to studying, putting all your energy into one thing, that can be boring. That can give you lack of perspective. That can you're not necessarily able to stay focused for that large amount of time on only one task. So there are times when it can actually be more interesting and more energizing to study several things to get perspective. And so I think the question of sequential versus simultaneous study for polyglotry, it should depend more than anything else on the nature of the languages that you're studying. Let's say you want to learn, you want to learn Spanish and Italian, or Japanese and Korean. In these cases, because Spanish and Italian are genetically related and very close in their structure and grammar, it would not be a good idea to study them at the same time, to start studying at the same time. You would have to spend energy keeping them separate in your mind. And you would spend more time trying to learn the materials, because if you actually learn one of these languages very well before you learn the other one, when you study the other one, you can almost get it for free. You can transfer a great deal of your knowledge. So with closely related languages, or in the case of Japanese and Korean that might not be genetically related, but certainly have a lot of structural similarity and have a great deal of lexical similarity. Likewise there too, if you learn one and then the other, you are going to save more time when you study the other one, and yes, you might confuse them in the learning, so studying these kind of languages separately is a good idea. However, if you want to learn Italian and Japanese, or Spanish and Korean, then there's no need to confuse them. It might happen, but there's no reason for that to happen. And getting the comparative perspective of studying that can actually be helpful to you in your learning progress. More than anything else, if you are studying languages that are not closely related, it's a question of, the last point here, sustainable balance and further development. The entire conceptual model of thinking, well, I'm going to learn this language, I'm going to finish learning it, and then move on to the next one, that's flawed. That doesn't happen. Learning a language is a lifelong activity. You don't finish it and move on. You need to keep developing it. At very least, you're going to probably rust away if you don't use a language. So the idea that you're going to learn one language, finish learning it, and then stop and then learn another language, what's going to happen to that first language? You're either going to have to schedule in more time for doing both languages, or you're going to inevitably end up stopping and starting. You're going to learn it, then you're going to stop, and so if you want to keep your knowledge alive of both languages and sustain it, then it is better to study both at the same time, perhaps at a slightly slower rate, but you'll be able to keep both of them going through simultaneous study. That's more efficient. So, these are my thoughts on the whole idea of time management for efficient foreign language study. And if this were a live lecture, I would open it up to questions now, but since it isn't, I'll just look for comments. And I will also promise now, as soon as I can manage the time, schedule it into my schedule, that I will continue making further lectures on the subject of language learning. Thank you for listening.